For this exercise, we're going to be doing another ball jump, but for this one, we're going to expand on it by adding a little bit of anticipation to the ball before it jumps into the air and then loses momentum as it bounces down. If you're following along in the book, this exercise is found on page 74, and we're going to do things a little bit different, but for the most part, everything should be exactly the same as followed in the book. To get started on this exercise, the first thing you need to do is locate and download the Anticipation Ball Animate file. When you open this up in Adobe Animate, the setup for this is going to be very similar to the last exercise we did in adding squash and stretch. The one main difference is the color of the ball, but if you go into your timeline, you'll notice it does have a background layer, and we've also got a ball layer that's already got the squash and stretch and the down and up motion animated for you. So let's get started adding anticipation to this particular animation sequence. Now the first thing that we want to do is to make a copy of the keyframes that we already have and establish the starting point of this ball instead of it being in the air as being on the ground. So to do this, we'll go to our timeline and let's select the 1st through the 24th frame. Since I have a background layer, I'm also going to select those background frames as well. Now to copy out these frames, you can do Control or right click on the timeline and choose Copy Frames. Then select the 25th frame right at the very end for both the ball and the background layer. And when you right click or Control click, we're going to paste the frames. Notice that this will automatically add the appropriate number of frames to this, and it copies over not just the objects inside of it, but it gets the motion tweening and all the keyframes along the timeline as well. Now if you were to test this animation, you'll notice that all it's doing is bouncing twice. What we want to do is to take this first set of the animated keyframes and turn that into our anticipation moment, then have it pop up from the bottom and then bounce and lose momentum as it goes along. Here's how the book's going to get you to do it. The first thing we want to do is to select our keyframe that has the final stretching motion before it hits the ground. So in this case, it's frame number 12, and we need to delete that away. So with it selected, you can Control or right click on it, and we're going to clear the keyframe. Once it's cleared, we can go back to our first keyframe, and we need to place this ball exactly where it hits the ground right as it squashes. To do this, and to help you do it, I'm going to turn on my onion skinning. With onion skin turned on, I should be able to see some of my future frames, and I'm going to click on the little green bracket and drag it till I can see that frame. Now with the first frame selected, and I've got my ball selected, I can move it down, and eventually I can use my arrow keys, and I'm carefully looking right here at the bottom edge until my blue line matches up with that bottom edge. Now I know both of those edges are exactly the same. I can turn off onion skinning. If I was to test it now, check out what happens. All it's doing is it's moving down and then finally popping up into the air. So this is the anticipation that we want to add to our ball before it launches itself into the air. Now let's see if we can tweak some of the animation to make it bounce a little bit better as well. When we test our animation, we see that it goes through anticipation, it pops up, then goes back down, squashes, and then pops back up again. So we need to have it returning back to the ground. So I'm going to go up to frame number 25. This is the first time it pops into the air, and highlight frames 25 through 38. And also don't forget to get the background frames as well. So with frames 25 through 38 selected, Control click on this, and we're going to copy the frames. From here, we can select frames 49 on both of the layers, and then Control or right click and paste the frames into this. Now you see that it goes up and down and then back up to the end right there. The very last frame that we have is the ball trying to return itself into the air. And what we really want to do is have it repeat the very first frame. So what I'm going to do is select the first frame on both the layers again. We'll copy this frame as well. And then go to the very end of our animation, frame number 62, and control click and paste the frames right there. This means it will return back down to this frame as well. Let's test the timing for our animation and see how it turns out. Goes up, down, and then stops. All right, so we got the basic movements, but it still looks a little bit quirky, especially at the end, and I think we can do a little bit better anticipation for the beginning of it as well. If we look at the very end of our animation, all of these actions are happening pretty quickly. Now I do want them to happen quickly, but I think we can spread it out and so that our eye can pick up on exactly what's going on. So I'm going to select this second to last frame, frame number 62, and press F5 to add one more keyframe to it. This means when it goes to that first little stretching motion, it will give it some time to squash back down. Let's do the same thing for the other squash and stretch motion too. So with the 61st frame selected, hit F5 and give that some time as well. Notice that we will lose our background, so let's choose our very last frame, hit F5, and that will fill in some time space for it. Now let's see what we can do about the timing of the anticipation sequence. If we go up to our timeline, I can see that the anticipation lasts for about half of a second. I want it to last a little bit longer. So I'm going to select some frames between frames 1 through 12 and press the F5 key to keep adding on some more time within this area. Of course, this is going to push everything down, and I'm going to push it till the second keyframe right here reaches frame number 40, and that's plenty long for that. Of course, when we do this, we need to add some keyframes to our background layer as well to match it up. So I'll keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing until they're all nice and even along this particular edge. Notice that the final frame that we have is frame number 92, if you're keeping track of that. Before we move on, let's also add some easing in and out to our anticipation sequence. So I'm going to select frame number 1, go over to our Properties panel, and under the tweening, we're going to set it from Custom to Ease In and Out. And to be honest, you can use any one of these first ones. I'm going to keep it at Quad. Double click on it. And this will let our ball quickly start in and slow and then pop up. The last thing that I want to do, we'll test our animation. I like the way it looks, but I want it to pause just a little bit before it finally pops into the air. Here's how we're going to do that. Going back to our timeline, frame number 40 is the last frame before 41 pops into the air. So I'm going to add some more frames between frame 40 and 41. With it selected, I'm going to hit F5, 1, 2, 3, 4, about 5 times. Now remember, because this had a motion tween turned on, if we were to keep it this way, it wouldn't just pop up, it would actually slowly morph into that one, and that's not what we want. So I'm going to select the tween on frame number 40, control click, and let's remove that classic tween. Now all it's going to do is pause right there for just a split second before finally popping into the air. Here's what it looks like. Much better. Now it's got some good anticipation set for it. I do see that I needed to add some more keyframes to my background layer, so we'll add some to there. And the next thing we want to do is adjust the height of our jump at the end of our animation. By the way, if you're following along in the book, we're now on part 3 of this exercise on page 78. If we look at our animation, we can see that it bounces up and then back down and then back up again. This second bounce shouldn't be so high because it loses a little bit of momentum. So with the 81st frame selected, we're going to take our ball and move it down about halfway. And since it is moving or losing momentum, it's going to move a little bit slower too. So we need to change the timing as well. So I'm going to select some of the frames before this keyframe and after this keyframe and remove them. Let's select about 3 frames, 1, 2, and 3. With those 3 selected, you can control click on it and tell it to remove the frames. And this will delete them away and pull it back. The other way you can do it, let's do it to this side, is select 3 frames. Whoops. Gotta sneak up on it. 3 frames selected. To quickly delete them away, you can use the keyboard shortcut of Shift F5, and that will remove those frames as well. Now that we've moved the distance and also the height, let's check out the timing. Much better. And the final thing we need to do is since it's losing momentum, it doesn't need to squash and stretch so much as well. So let's fix those squashing and stretching. We'll select the stretching motion that's on this frame, frame number 86, and open up your transform panel. Instead of the width being pulled in 80% and stretched out 120, let's do something like 85%. This will widen it out, and maybe the transform will be 115% for the height. The same should be true for the squashing effect once it hits. So instead of it squashing down 120, we'll do 115, and the height of it will be 85 as well. Just remember, as long as you've got both of these adding up to 200%, you've got it good. Then it will bounce back up just a little bit, and again, it's lost a little bit of its momentum. So for this one, instead of maybe 80 or 85, we'll let it be 90. And this one, it'll be 110. And then finally, it'll come to rest back down as a regular ball. You can see that we've also got way too many frames for our background now, so let's get rid of these frames. I'll select all of these and then Shift F5 to delete those away. Now let's test out our final animation. Pops up, bounces, and then loses some momentum. Pops up, bounces, and then loses a little bit momentum. In looking at that final frame, if it's off by a little bit, let's figure out why that's happening. I would venture to guess because it's stretching out way more than is necessary. So I'm going to open up my transformation one more time. Maybe this time we'll go 95 and 105. And I'll even bring it down just a bit by nudging it down. Now let's test this out. Pops up, goes down, and then it matches really, really good. Now the final thing we're going to do for this exercise is add a quiver to the anticipation sequence. The book lists out 2 different methods of doing this. We're only going to do method number 1, and this method starts on page 82 of your textbook. I'm going to select the very first keyframe on the ball layer, and this is the start of our anticipation sequence. With that frame selected, we can go into our Properties panel and open up the tweening that we created. Right now we put in just a default ease in and ease out sequence, but we want to create a custom sequence. So with custom selected, one more time, custom selected, double click on new, and this will give you your own little chart graph to work on. The first thing we're going to do is to click on the very bottom left-hand corner, and then this will give you a dot in the center, and we can click and drag this downward to give us some easing in. Then you can click on this top and drag this upward, and this will give us some easing out. You can test this at any time by clicking the play button, and it'll give you an idea of what this will look like within your animation. But here's the fun part. In order to add the quiver, we're going to put the little quiver within the actual sequence of our custom easing. To do this, I'm around just past the halfway point. I'm going to start clicking and adding some individual points along the way. There really is no set number to do, But for this one, you can see I've done it in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, roughly 10 different dots. With those established, go to every other dot and pull it downward, just a little bit. What you're going to create is kind of this roller coaster effect. Let's actually add one more, because I want it to go back up and then go into this sequence. With those pulled down, now when we test it, watch it quiver as it follows along this timeline. There it goes, and then pops up. That extra little bit really sells the fact that it's struggling and to anticipate the final jump. Once you've got this created and you're satisfied with the ease in that you created, we'll do save and apply and have that applied to our final animation. Now we can test it, hitting Command Return. There it goes, pops up, and then settles back to do it again. With this done, you can now save your animation file and upload it to the classroom page.